Okay, I've got a couple shows that were in front of me that are hard to live up to, but I'll do my best. Yep, our session is compliance, crackdown, audits, penalties, and playing by the rules. And that's like, this is the tougher part of resort tax administration. You know, there's always, you know, a bad actor or two, you gotta run them down. I think Richard mentioned that earlier. So I'm gonna ask you the standard questions about you and your community or your role. For everyone, I'm gonna say, way to be here as an auditor. I'm sure that all of us are probably wanting to get our hooks into you if we haven't already with questions. But if you could just tell us about yourself, like how long you have done your role, what your role is, and then we'll start with that. The other thing I'm gonna ask you is about your community and then about the resort tax in general. And I'll remind you of the little pieces that go with each. So you can just start with yourself and your community and your role. That'd be great. Katie.
All right, so Katie Thompson, I'm the finance director at the town of West Yellowstone. I have lived in my community for 5.5 years. And I have been in my role for about 2.5. Lanie left in August of 22, and then I started on Halloween of 22. So there's a little gap there. But I absolutely love my job. I love my community, and it's a great place to be. If you haven't been to West Yellowstone, go to West Yellowstone.
My name is Matthew Cope. I'm a partner at Holmes and Turner in Bozeman. I've been in Bozeman for about 10 years, practicing CPA, been doing audits my whole career. Got hooked up with Big Sky when I started with Holmes and Turner doing their internal audit. And then after we had left, they had entered into an agreement with us to do their compliance audits, and been doing those for a couple years now. But yeah.
All right. So let's see. I think we've heard a little bit about Big Sky and its size, but we haven't really listened to about West Yellowstone, its population, your tourist season, and what makes your year-round demographics.
Okay, so we have about 1,200 residents in the town of West Yellowstone, with, in the summertime, hundreds of thousands of people going through our town all the time, millions by the end of the season. So it's crazy to have a wonderful sense of community though still too, which I think is really unique about West Yellowstone, just because we are all very service-minded to serve our tourists, and just like you all are as well. So let's see. We obviously, our busiest time is when the park is open, and we have been, I don't know if it's self-titled, but supposedly we're the snowmobile capital of the world. And so we do have a very high winter season as well, not as high as our summer, but you know, we have about 6 weeks to regroup ourselves before the next round of tourists comes, you know, in between our seasons. So we're fortunate to have a very high summer area, and also a very well winter season as well.
Okay, and then just a little more on your communities, or you're interesting. You're an interesting outlier, so I don't know how much this applies really. So you're kind of under the magnifying glass, Katie. But it says when was resort tax implemented, and who or what is your governing authority, and how often do they meet?
Yeah. So for us, obviously you guys have heard that we were the first. Resort tax was in our community before I was born, so I can't tell you. Sorry, but true. We started, I believe it was in 1986 is when we got the 3%. I believe it started being an option and went to law in 1985. So as soon as we could jump on that, we jumped on it. And then with our 1% that we just use for general infrastructure is we started in 2019, I think is when I was voted on, or something like that. So that has not been around as much, but it's nice to kind of see we're filling in our 5-year, graph and kind of seeing the trends there as that's been going on. Our governing authority is everything's done through the town council. So they approve our budget, that we get a couple $100,000 in property tax. Everything is resort tax for us. So our town council meets twice a month, the first and third Tuesday of every month.
All right, okay. Well, we'll jump into some of the questions, that are associated with this particular session. And I'm gonna start, there's 3 topics, there's audits and penalties, and then, just playing by the rules. And so I try to lump the, questions into these 3 categories. And, this is where, Matthew's answers are gonna be interesting to us all, because you're the link between the entity and the people who are collecting the tax in terms of the compliance if we're doing resort tax audits. So let's start with you, Katie, just because that's the piece that everyone else is either trying to get to and becoming familiar with or familiar with. And so can you just tell us what your audit process is? And the selection process for those, audits and all that.
Yeah, so we audit 12 businesses every year, every fall. And what's important to us is timing of those audits are crucial when you're making those decisions. When we started doing that in October is when our resort tax audit is. We're looking at actually moving that up to September this year, just because of it's hard to get those businesses that are closing down in October to still come in and do the audits and trying to get their information. So whenever your busy season is, make sure that your business owners are there to do your audit. So ours is 12, 2 of those have to be T-bid related. So they get a resort tax and a T-bid audit on theirs, 2 out of the 12. And then, let's see.
Take a minute and tell everyone what the T-bid is.
Okay.
I don't know if everyone knows what that is.
So T-bid is the Tourism Business Improvement District. And they basically, for us in West Yellowstone, they collect $2 for every night for a hotel that there's regulations on how big the hotel has to be. I think it has to be over 10 rooms. But so they collect money to do advertising throughout the entire country, wherever, for West Yellowstone. And I think there's many towns that do this. I'm sure Whitefish does it too.
I think Billings does it too. I think there are many Montana towns that do this, the T-bid tax, and it's based on room nights. And so it's many communities that don't have resort tax still do T-bid. And I think they get to choose what they do with that money, but it's like a separate, additional revenue source.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
And how many motel rooms does West have? It's in the thousands, yeah. 2,000.
I know there's more, I think it's 2,400. I know there's more hotel beds than residential beds.
By far.
Yeah.
And you said you audit 12 businesses out of how many businesses? Like what percentage is it?
I couldn't tell you that right now, but it is a small amount, but it's just been set out that that's how our ordinance reads, so it doesn't have to be 12, it depends on the community. And for that, T-bid collections come in through the town and then we give it back to the district. So that's why they asked us to include them in the audit process there. And then when we're selecting for our businesses, we literally we print off from our business licensing software. And last year I just had Google generate and pull 12 names for me. So you can do it that way. There's other random selectors out there. And then actually my clerk does it. I go through and make sure that they meet the qualifications, that we have 2 T-bids and all of that. And then I send it to our auditors and they take over things from there.
So let's jump over to Matthew then and talk about that. Is that a function? Sometimes the auditors are the ones doing the random selection. Do you guys do that?
So no, actually, Big Sky has their own methodology for selecting their audits. They were selecting 20 a year, 10 in the spring and 10 in the fall. Got a little behind, but we don't have a part in that. They kind of set their own methodology. We're just the independent party that's there to
Do the
do the actual audit.
Okay.
And Kristen, our methodology.
So we get 60% the risk based, so based on the amount of collections, when the business opens, how many years their last audit, and then if we have a percentage for based on a lead, so if there's something that, you know, a board member notices the receipt isn't correct, maybe we'll audit that business, and then there's percentage that are randomly selected.
That's super interesting. And then is it only Big Sky that you work for, or do you have another
Yep.
entity that you do resort tax for?
Right now, only fix.
Okay, and so you just kind of answered the next question, which was, does your selection process include a random component or a non-compliant, like a non-compliance component?
Yeah.
And so it looks like you guys have some of both.
Yeah,
Is that why, like, how did you come to the number of 20?
it was 10 for a long time, and then just after a period of time, we realized how much we'd grown, and 20 seemed like, you know, the next level to try and hit.
And I'm gonna follow up with her question, do you know how many businesses there are, like, so what percentage does that become of your?
It contains 500 that are collected.
And so, do you, Matthew, does your entity have any, input on like entities that were not in compliance, say from a previous audit? That is incorporated in the selection of businesses for next year, do you know?
Not really. That's really all up to the resort tax district and their board. I will add, like, from a CPA's perspective, the term audit is used pretty loosely. For us, that means something completely different than what an audit might mean to you guys. So, like, we have different sets of standards that we have to follow. Usually these are structured around kind of like an agreed upon procedure or an examination. And those two are very different. Agreed upon procedures are much less in scope, and they can be an 8 to 12 hour engagement. An examination could be 10 to 40 hours, depending on the entity that you're looking at. So it's very important to identify which ones you're wanting to do those types of services for if you're working with an independent CPA,
Okay,
and understand the difference.
yeah, so agreed upon procedures, that lends itself to the question of what is it that you're auditing for, or what's the compliance measures that you're looking for or auditing for? And so what is your experience with that? Like, what is it that you're auditing for?
Yep, so like our AUP engagements, there's 5 criteria. And so an AUP can be designed for pretty much anything. And you work with the client to set those procedures. So it could be really whatever you want to look at. And then in that particular case, we give you a report, but we're not giving an opinion. We're just giving you the outcome. So it's, did they collect and remit the correct amount of resort tax? We'll just go through the stuff that we get from them, recalculate it, compare it to what was submitted into GovOS or however the district is collecting it. And then we'll just say what the exception rate is, if there was one, what the discrepancy was. And then we give it back, and that's our report. And then the board can do what they want. Usually, that could lead to a more in scope, deeper type of engagement, which would be an examination. But yeah, that's.
Okay, and then, so Katie, you talked about how you do the random selection, and then, and that do you ever have a non-compliance component?
So it's been really fun. I have done 3 of these now. And my very first year had someone that was over like 4,000 that they owed the town, right? And you're like, okay, that's not too terrible. They were hard to work with. But being my first year, I kind of was a little bit more forgiving and trying to figure out, is this normal? Is this not normal? And then I had the 2023 audit and it was way worse. So I was glad I was a little forgiving there. And I had someone that was over $10,000 that they owed the town. And that triggered a little bit more of like, why are they having this big of a discrepancy? And so with our regulations with the town, I could do a 2-year look back and then also look at the current year, because you're always, dealing with the last year, full year. So they have to go to their tax return and everything else. And so, we're still working through that because they are so difficult. But when I think for the administration, like they have to figure out what is a triggering point, like at what point is this non-compliance? Because it can be $5 and they're technically not doing something right, But $10,000 was a big deal. So we're still working through that one. And then in my 3rd year of doing it, I had another situation where it's closer to $11,000 that they were not paying the town. And so that one's been a little bit easier to work with. It's a newer business owner, larger hotel. So we are once again doing that 2-year look back, and then we'll be looking at the next year as well. So I don't look at it as something that I go back and like just make sure I pick them for the next year. Were selected. I can automatically do those look backs and the look forward to make sure that we're getting proper resort tax collections.
Okay, great.
Can I ask a quick?
Yeah,
In that instance, is your district allowed to charge interest on overdue collection?
So no, but we're getting ready to change that.
You mean it would be done by ordinance,
Yeah.
it's not state made?
This is one thing that, at first I was like, this doesn't seem right, because if they're just delinquent, we have a fee for that and penalties for that. But when it's something that's came out through an audit, there's not real clear language on what we should be doing. And so I want to make sure, it's one of our town council priorities to be looking at this year is what are we going to be doing? Because we're losing out. Right now, if they're delinquent, it's like a 3% penalty. So should we be charging a penalty on these two? So
Why are you differentiating delinquent for the $10 deficit versus how do you define the $10,000 shortfall?
yeah, so it would be
That's delinquent
anything.
also, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's what I would be presenting to my council is like if anything that they owed back the town because they didn't pay enough in the first place. There would be an interest. It wouldn't just be the people that are 10,000. But I need to just decipher a real amount to be able to do the look back as well, to look forward for more audit years. Because audits are so important. I know they're like the worst word in the entire world when you're in finance, but it's the most important thing you'll do because we have gotten back so much resort tax that we were owed that people weren't paying us.
And the last question, I don't mean to take so much time, but when these are done randomly, like in Big Sky, is it a confrontational situation sometimes? You're asking somebody to open their books and I can't imagine everybody's thrilled about it.
It can be, yeah, I think it depends on the business and, we kind of try to work with them to, if they're not willing to give us everything we ask for up front, then will you give us this, you just give us your tax return and maybe not your bank statements or, and then see if we can work through it with less than what we asked for. But it can be, surprising.
I'm gonna direct a little bit of that question to Matt too, because sometimes you're caught in the crossfire as the auditor. Where it's the entity, the resort tax entity that's imposing the audit on a business. And so do you find that you're dealing with some particular wrath on that front or?
I haven't had that experience yet. I think it helps because I'm not involved, at the district. If I was an employee, they might view it that way. I kind of take an approach where I'm like out there to like help them figure it out, and like help them through the calculation and I'm not so much as like you know, let me look at everything you have and dig in and like accuse.
Mhm.
Or I'm just like, just hear their story, let me see what you have, try to recalculate. And I think that helps.
I think that there's always an opportunity, with regard to the auditors, for education. So like if it's not just the comb through your books and this is what you're doing right or wrong, but it's, by the way, did you know that you're taxing on tax, or you're, you know, like that's some of the more common issues with that. But also I wanted to get back to your comment, Katie, when you were like, I was glad I was a little more forgiving on that first one. Tell us about your authority to decide what happens.
Yeah.
With the results of the audit.
Well, I felt, number one, that this title of this breakout or panelist playing by the rules was basically my middle name. I like rules, I like structure, that's how I live my life. And so it's hard for me because I really need those guidelines. So I think that's why I'm having the council like look at this and help me have more of a guideline, and so that way we are fair and equitable to everybody, right? And everybody knows the standards that are laid out. And you know, when you look at gross, I mean, you can see their sales, right? Like, and when someone's bringing in $1 or $2 and it's only $4,000 difference, like, you know, you kind of have to use your best judgment. And it was a conversation that I had too with, thankfully our clerk has been there for 25 years. And I'm like, okay, you've been through a couple of these audits, not that she's really done them, but she's heard the story, she's done that stuff. So it was just something I bounced off of her that first year. And, you know, to your question too about the feedback you get from these people and they're not wanting to participate, when I pull those 12 and I'm starting to collect the information for the auditor, I know exactly who's going to be the ones that owe us money, because they're the ones that are so resistant. They don't want to, you know, give us anything. So it's very telling. But for us, thankfully, we're a town. We have our business licensing too. And so if they don't do the audit and refuse to do it, we don't issue them a business license for the next year. So we do have that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna make sure I take advantage of you, Matthew, to the full extent that I can. So I'm gonna kind of throw this question in here because it's a part of the mechanism of the audit. I'm just gonna say, and maybe you guys will agree with me, but because resort tax is reported on in an honor system, we used that word earlier, today, where we really have no idea what the business has done in terms of revenue and what they're supposed to have submitted, other than what they remit. And so I know for Whitefish, the only hammer, as it were, is the audit itself. You know what I mean? That the possibility that you may become audited is what keeps you remitting honestly. And so if we could just talk a little bit about that, and then what you, either West Yellowstone as an entity or you, Matthew, need to complete the audit in a way that's meaningful.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
So I guess just talking about, you know, the procedures and how you would make sure that they're honest in their submissions. I mean, your greatest risk in this engagement is the completeness of their data. So when you think about that, if you're like looking at a restaurant, you're going to want to get point of sale reports from their system. You're going to get their bank statements. You want to get their tax return, at least for Montana. And, you know, there's always the risk that they don't report all of their revenue on the tax return. But, you know, if you get their bank statements, you should be able to prove cash. And you can see all the deposits that are going in for the year. And you can do a reconciliation to get back to, you know, what's actually revenue, what's contributed capital, you know, those types of things.
Okay. And Katie?
Yeah, So for us too, yeah, looking at that point of sale system reports is so huge. Understanding, their systems. And for my auditor, he won't even accept an Excel report anymore. He wants the report directly pulled off the point of sale system, so, it's once again balancing between the tax return, the bank statements, and that point of sale report. You feel like then you have a complete, look at the business for the year, and, you can complete your audit.
Do you guys both, or you as representing Big Sky, is it a year? You're looking at the whole year? And is it by calendar year or pretty much?
Yeah, for us it is just because of the tax return and the time.
Okay. I know that Whitefish only audits 3 months. Check out, just say.
Oh,
You voice went down, you said Whitefish only audits and then you voice forward. Didn't you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, and for them too, I'll need to say that. So Whitefish only audits for June, July, and August of a year.
Oh, true, sure.
Which I think is a challenge only because, if we are a ski town. So we have businesses that are only open in the winter, so. Does that mean that they, like, I don't know, that'll be a question to be answered,
How many do you do?
We only do 12 a year.
You do 12 for that 3-month increment?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
so do you only look at bank statements then?
Well, this is a struggle that I'm learning about, and that is, I don't feel like our auditors have provided a list of items that the businesses could use to know what they must bring. They've kept it vague, like, bring what you need to bring to substantiate what you remitted. And I think that the lack of standardization is biting us in the butt a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, how can they be responsible if they're not providing a standardized set of documents? So, just.
So to speak a little bit to that, so whenever the district selects their businesses, Kristen sends out a letter immediately like, hey, you were selected for audit. Be aware that you're gonna need to gather these documents. And then what I do is whenever I get that list and I make contact with the business owner, I use we call it a PBC list, but it's a provided by client list, software that has it all standard, same stuff. And it's a portal that they can go upload if they wanted to. A lot of people though, some people aren't very tech savvy, so then I give an option to like either mail it in or I can go out and meet with them. Because generally all these engagements will have some form of like in-person interaction. I like to go out and meet them, kind of see how they're operating, where their business is. Just to get a feel for what might be running through that point of sale. So I try to standardize it, but.
Yeah, super helpful. I was gonna say, on behalf of the businesses, they can know what to expect. Takes a little of the fear out of being audited. It's, yeah, sure.
So just for curiosity's sake, and not looking for a bid or anything like this, but to do the kind of just the preliminary look. What is that charge cost versus the deeper dive cost? So like if a guy was having to, gonna have to budget for this process, what does a guy need to budget for that process?
Yeah, so if it's an agreed upon procedure, I mean, all of this stuff is dependent upon how easy it is to get in contact with the business owner and how difficult they're gonna be. But if they have information ready, available, and we can get started on it, I mean, it's probably gonna take 8 to 12 hours for that agreed upon procedure to get through all of our checklists and everything that we're required to do for standards. It's probably gonna be a blended rate of like 150 an hour, depending on who's working on the engagement, so. I mean, it could be probably $2,000 to $3,000 per engagement. Somewhere around there.
And a deeper dive, I assume probably.
Yeah.
7,000.
Examinations are tough because, so like to give a little background on what the different level of work is. On an examination, we're actually required to go out and get a whole feel for their internal control structure related to that revenue stream. So we've got to have a deep understanding of how all their processes involved for making sure that the data is complete. And so I think it's really important that, you know, the districts understand what that service means, because it might not be what you want. And we actually issue an opinion in the examination on their compliance and prepare like a schedule of the resort tax collections. So if you're not really concerned about their internal controls and if they have deficiencies, I'd probably just steer you towards the AUP anyway, the smaller engagement, just because it's going to be quick and it's going to get you exactly what you want to know. Like, is there a deficiency? Do we need to look at them further? And they're much faster.
Along the lines of that question, Katie, because you have had some difficult clientele, it looks like, did you consider doing the deeper dive for those particular, like, or was it just so apparent just on the basic AUP that things were out of whack that it was enough to go with?
Yeah, so we have a contract with our auditor, and so they know that there's this 12 standard audits, you know, and that's our baseline to start. Now with these that we're going back on, then yeah, we're definitely doing the deeper dive. But I try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, especially we're auditing at the end of the summer season. We are all exhausted. I get that. We're all a little cranky. We're ready to have our little break. So I try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, give them a fair chance. But then once it gets into it and we find out there's something probably more going on, we'll take it that one step further.
And does that become part of the next year's audits? Or do you just engage right at that?
I keep it separate, yeah. And so it's maybe not the smartest move I've ever made administratively, because then it just is another thing on my desk that I could have, based on our rules, I could have slid in, but I chose to keep it completely separate.
Great.
Then one quick question, is there must be a different challenge with things like short-term rentals versus the brick and mortar businesses to check compliance? Can you comment on that?
I think there's a big educational piece when it comes to the audit and compliance and stuff like that. Like I make sure that we have at least one short-term rental on there. I try to. And those people are probably the people after the audit that come back and they're like, thank you, because they learned so much about things that they weren't possibly doing right with resort tax. Because they're just, you know, Joe and Mary on the street trying to make a business in West Yellowstone and don't quite understand that. So, and understand resort tax. So, there's probably just, they get the most educational out of it. And it's not really, they haven't really been a big glaring compliance issue, other than honestly, most of the time they probably overpaid us.
Yep, and that happens too.
So has anybody dealt with, cause it was my under impression, talking with some Airbnb people, that if they're using, you know, one of those services are collecting that, and then does that get readmitted directly to the owner for them to send in? And so you're actually auditing the owner, not Airbnb.
Correct. Yeah.
Platform. Or whatever.
Yeah. So yes, they do collect, but I'm not getting a huge 60,000 check a month from VRBO and trying to figure out who gets what and all that. That gets back to the owner, and the owner is responsible for remitting. And so then if they're late, it's then on them too, then to pay fees.
I think Big Sky is the only entity I'm aware of that has struck a deal with VRBO and Airbnb.
Yeah, we have a contract with Airbnb and VRBO, and they collect on behalf of all of the owners and remit on behalf of all of the owners, and then we audit. I think we're getting ready to audit Airbnb.
Oh, wow.
And that's a similar thing we do with Decker Technologies is what we're using.
Is it?
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. One is, has anybody considered, good behavior auditing, where you start out with a broader net and you do I'll call it auditing light. You know, over more of the businesses, but you're doing just a checkpoint on audit. And if they keep passing that, you just keep them in, I'll call it the audit light category. If you start to see certain businesses or whatever, it doesn't look like right to you, then you go step it up into the next level of audit procedure. But if you cast a broader net to keep people more honest, you know, of all the businesses, and then if they are in good behavior, I'm making these terms up, they stay in that state, but they know that they're being obviously watched, and they do an audit light off of maybe one or two facts that you check versus the amount paid in, and you go, well, that's within the tolerance of this business, we're okay. I mean,
I think that's what we're kind of generally talking about, like when he said, you know, the term audit has a couple definitions there, and so the agreed upon procedures, I'm gonna say, is the audit light, and the examination is the deeper audit. And so like that's really what's transpiring,
tax
just exactly
return,
that.
and you look at a tax return, the auditor, and you do the math and you go, oh, well, they're within tolerance, you know.
And the other thing I just wanna point out is because we're only doing like 12 a year or 20 a year, and there's hundreds of businesses, the pattern is not gonna be that evident. Because, now I know that, well, I'm gonna let you answer that. How often does a business get audited for the town of West Yellowstone? A resort tax paying business?
Well, it just depends. For me,
In general, like if you passed your audit, so you were selected and you passed your audit. What's the likelihood that you will be audited again the next year?
you won't. We try to keep those like, let's just say the generator selected 12 businesses and 3 of those were just audited within even the last 3 years and they were in good standing with the town. I'll probably have the selector go and generate 3 more businesses. I think our general rule is 7 years. But after that 7 years, they definitely are back on the list. But I also look at, you know, these businesses sometimes keep the name, but owners change. So if the owners have changed, they're back in the pool. So there are some other factors in there that I do look at. But I'm definitely like one of mine that was audited last year. We ended up having to credit them $500 or so. You know, I'm gonna make sure they're not on the list for this year.
Like Danny whispered in my ear when they asked him, he said, you said 20 businesses were being audited, and I asked him out of how many, and he said roughly 500. Okay, you know, in statistics, 20 out of 500 is not statistically significant. Though I'll bet you there's judgment on what 20 you select somewhere along the line, the guilty ones or the suspected ones. But 20 out of 500.
Right, which is why I'm like, there's not really gonna be a big pattern, you know what I mean, that develops, because you try not to hit the same business for auditing purposes, you know, 2 years in a row, because there's so many other businesses to audit, right? And you wanna spread it out so that everyone, so that random nature of the audit is, you're being true to that, and it doesn't feel like you're getting targeted.
Shut up, but it is, you broaden the net to make them all aware. But it go back to my audit light, but it's a lot more than 20 out of 500 to say whatever, statistically.
It sounds like a good problem for you to figure out.
That's right. Yeah, once you look at the price.
What you're doing is keeping the good guys honest, I guess, you know, participating in the program.
Some of it's volume too, John. When you look at, when you look at the, well, volume of the audits, but also just like dollar amount.
80-20 rule.
Yes.
Top 20 is probably 80% of our.
I think-
yeah.
Probably 80 or more percent of our collections every month.
Yeah.
Like the big dogs, I think we have them on a cycle of every
Every
3 years.
Oh,
He'll
So-
find the.
thanks for sharing
Yeah.
that. That's awesome.
So like the resort, every 3 years, they're gonna get audited, the club, every 3 years, they're gonna.
That's a big.
I liked your earlier comment when you said the possibility of an audit is actually what gets that volunteer. You know, there's difference between genuine mistakes and education people don't know, but it's that possibility, even if it's only 20 out of 500, I don't wanna get caught like speeding or anything else.
Yeah, and believe me, I do not tell my business owners, oh, great job, you did a good audit. You won't be audited for another 7 years. They think they get pulled back into the pool and can be pulled at any time. So, you know, and they want to keep that good gracious town too.
Yeah.
You're fine.
And so
That's
we
fine.
So I
Okay,
don't think there's
I'm-
anything in statute that requires audits, is that, we're all doing these.
Yeah, I think that's,
Plans.
We write them into our ordinances. And we happen to have the problem that it's in our ordinance and they aren't doing it.
mhm.
But maybe we're so good because of the threat, you know?
Does everyone use a third party? I guess that was are you using a third party after you, yeah. Lanie, you.
Yeah, and to speak to that, I think that, using a third party for the audits. I don't know how it's good for you too, like you just say, well, we just generated the random list. And, you know, this is now you're in the tube.
Well,
And it keeps a little distance between you and, what feels like the enforcement.
Right.
Even though at the end of the day, like you've done your due diligence and then it comes back to the town or the city or the entity. But
well,
yeah.
I think it also helps that bring a third party in, so it's not you looking at it in her business.
Mhm.
It's your third party. So.
Right.
They just feel like.
Yes,
They're dumping, you know, you're.
yeah. And I think to speak to Shane's point, you know, this is Montana, so there's not a lot of big towns here. And so, that local component, you know, like these are your neighbors, right? That own the businesses that you're having audited. And so it is nice to have that third party doing a close look at the books so that confidentiality, which is a built-in part of resort tax, right? We don't ever say what business is earning what. And so that's really, you know, a part of what this whole thing is we're doing here. And we maintain that confidentiality by having the third party. So thank you so much for having us.
So the only time, correct me if I'm wrong, but the only time that gets is if you have to go like a legal issue and. And I remember that in Weston for years.
Yeah, I mean, if it's escalated to a different level, then
Different level, then it becomes kind of a public knowledge type
Mhm.
issue,
sure,
because.
it's a matter of record, yeah.
So, I think the most cost-effective engagement for the districts is the agreed upon procedure, the audit light. Because we can do more faster, to identify those problem businesses. When we get into the examination, something that really locks up that engagement is at the end, we're required to get a management representation letter from the responsible party, which is the business. And that lays out that they're, you know, doing all these actions to make sure that they're doing their due diligence to withhold and remit the correct amount. A lot of times the business owners don't want to sign that rep letter and provide it to us. When that happens, it's a scope limitation on us. We can't issue a clean opinion at that point. So your report from your independent auditor is going to be disclaimed. And so it's really at that point, not a lot you can take from that report. There will still be a schedule in there that shows the deficiency and the discrepancy, but there will be no opinion on compliance because the rep letter was not returned. So.
Yeah, good point. And so it's back on the entity's plate.
Yeah.
To figure out how to do.
Now it's going to legal and you're determining what you want to do as far as enforcement and clawing back those funds.
Okay.
And then you just mentioned, you know, it goes back on the entity, of course, because like for me, for my real Town of West Yellowstone audit, I have to provide that auditor showing that I did my resort tax audit and I completed it. And so it really does fall back on the entity in so many ways, because you start having audit findings, you lose state funding, federal funding, all these things. So, you know, it's a big deal.
Mhm. Okay, I wanna move on to penalties because we're encroaching on time here, but I knew that would be a pretty popular topic, so I really appreciate it. What role do penalties play in driving compliance? And, Matthew, I'm just like, I'm gonna direct most of these questions at her, but if you have something to contribute because of what you know, that would be great, you know? Okay, so what role do penalties play in driving compliance for you, Katie?
So like we collect monthly, and so for us, the penalties just. The town of West Yellowstone is a little bit more complicated than the normal town. I'm gonna try to say this the best way I can. So we have a 5% of the 4% that go back to the business owner. But then they voted that 2.5% of that. Well, half of that 5% goes to a MAP fund for marketing, promotion and events and stuff like that. So if they don't pay by the 20th of the month, they lose their 2.5% that they could take back, that deduction. And then, if they don't pay by the end of the month that they're supposed to, then they get either a $25 penalty or a $50 penalty, depending on the gross sales. So if it's over $1,500, then they get the $50 penalty. And then if they don't pay the next month either, then we start adding the 3% on the 4%. So we have this Excel sheet that thankfully Lanie created. So it gets a little complicated with our penalties, but this is the thing I'm running into right now as well is the $25 or the $50 enough? And when it comes to $25 on $1,500, yeah, that's probably enough. But when someone is supposed to be remitting to us $20,000 for the month or whatever, is $50 is the change in their car. And so, it's just reality of it in some of these numbers. And so that's gonna be another thing for the council to be deciding on if we wanna raise those, because I don't think for us, our penalties are enough. Because I have many businesses that won't pay resort tax all year long. And then when it comes to business licensing time and they wanna make sure they get their business license, they'll just give me a check then. And they just hold on to this money and there's really no penalty, not enough from the town to make it worth it for them.
I think that's where the interest helps, because we have ours is 1% per month, and so if it's a large payment, it's 1%.
Yeah.
It makes a difference if it's a larger payment.
Yeah.
Katie, is that the only safeguard you have, is just not issuing a new business license, not like filing a lien on somebody's property or?
No, my only thing is I can withhold their business license. And like right now, I'm gonna have a hotel that won't be in compliance in June 30th. What am I supposed to do on July 1st? Go in there and say you no longer can do business in West Yellowstone, but yet you have, 65 rooms or something like that you have booked out for the rest of the summer. But then again, they need pay. And so, I'm gonna have an interesting summer with some of mine.
On the flip side, we're in Red Lodge, we're revisiting ours because we had the 50 and 100, and then 5-10 years ago. They went to a $250 fee. At 30 days. And a $500 fee at 60, I wanna say, so it's. $750 for total fines, but there's also an appeal process, and guess what, we're having a special council meeting a week just to deal with people coming in and say, well, $750, I'm gonna give it a shot. So we have started out, there are some things we're doing that I hope help that package we're using for short-term rentals, which seems to be the biggest one, and then you do feel bad, $250, I owe $23 in resort tax. But what we have started doing is, because it takes us a while to know if they're done, we just do it quarterly. We send out a blast that says, hey, it's that time, if you've already done it, thank you. But one of the big things that we observed as council was, because it's council's decision, yay or nay to waive that. But people kept saying, well, how can we charge them this if we didn't send them a notice? Or, well, we can't send them a notice until we've had time to process and it's too late. So what we've started doing is sending a blast out to everybody. It's that time, which makes the plea a little less gleeful. But I think you raise a good point is there's too little and then there's big enough that everybody's gonna complain and you're creating a bunch of additional administrative work to do so.
Technology is really our friend, I think, in terms of sending out the blast or the, the information, like. It creates a timely communication. And then it also gives you this opportunity to get the information out there, have a record that you've done that also. So that you're not leaving it, no one's left out.
By the way, we
of it.
discovered, so we don't have email addresses for everybody. So, yeah, that's something that's now added to when people, we get them on the email list. And in exchange, we'll give you a blast and, a little reminder that's there.
Or a business license. I think that if you don't have if you don't have an email address, then better get one. Or you may not get a business license. I mean, I think business licensing, registration being attached is a helpful tool. Most definitely. There was some legislation, not this last session, but that came around previously in the last legislative session, and that really questioned the veracity of the need to do business licensing. Some entities responded to that. I know Whitefish was like, okay, we're not gonna, we've had a lot of bad press. We want to make sure that, whatever the legislature says we're doing. And so they kind of revamped business licensing. It's now called business registration. It's like pared down our business licensing process. And it also doesn't marry business licensing to resort tax as much as we'd like. However, it is the tool that we use to determine whether someone has to collect resort tax and therefore whether or not they need an inspection. Like if you're a short-term rental, you should have an inspection by the health department, fire department, things like that. But so there's some mechanisms that way that I don't know that the area districts, they're not gonna have that tool because they don't have the entity.
We do it regardless of whether we're supposed to or not.
Okay, there you go.
Yes, so we
Good
do
enough.
registration
Okay.
every year.
Good, well, there you go. So for those of you who are setting it up, that's something to know, you know what I mean?
And I would agree, it's like, it latches it onto an annual activity that
Mhm.
like gives us some credibility.
To capture all the businesses, because some people come in and do business there and they have no idea about resort tax. So
All right,
we just said everyone has to register, and then that they get the ordinance and they figure out if they need to collect or not.
okay, yeah, that's very helpful. So let's see, so it sounds like we've had some entities that have made some changes, like where you used to have your penalty system one way and then you made changes. I know that I've watched a few come and go in West Yellowstone. I'm new enough to Whitefish. I haven't seen a whole lot of changes, although on this last revision of our ordinance, we didn't have a penalty system really, which amazes me to have collected resort tax for this long. And it was like 10% per annum, which is like 0.0000274 times the number of days, and that's 53 cents. So it's like not having a penalty at all. You know what I mean? And so, but I've also seen the effects of what feels to the community like a draconian sort of penalty system, like $250, $500. That's pretty serious. And so my question for you, Dave, would be: is that regardless of whether you have $23 worth of resort tax to remit or thousands of dollars, it's the same? Is that how you
Ours
play it?
currently is right now, so there's a entrance which is based on it. And they wanted to go for, like I said, we haven't, I would argue we haven't hit the magic formula yet on that. Like I said, your second pass and your third pass will be better than your first one, but we're here to learn from each other. as
Yeah,
one works.
yeah, so that's an evolving science for sure, penalties. Okay. And so now I think let's move to playing by the rules. What does compliance look like and what are the most common types of non-compliance? And I think both of you will be able to weigh in on that. Let's start with you, Matthew.
Yeah, so compliance is them remitting the correct amount of tax. The common types of non-compliance that I've seen, just in the limited engagements that I've been involved with, most of it comes from not understanding what's taxable. The district does a really good job of putting FAQs on their website, and for different types of industries. And it even helped me when I was doing my review, over like an outfitter, for example, determining what's taxable, if the sale occurs in the district or outside the district, or if they're floating through the district, or, you know, whatever. Business owners like to take their interpretation and spin it the way that works best for them. And they'll try to convince you that that's correct and that's reasonable. So, I mean, that's kind of what I've seen, you know, net sales, gross sales. Those,
Talk about net sales for a second, if you would.
I mean, that's why you have to go back and get the point of sale reports from their, you know, from that entity. Make sure you're getting the correct number. You know, even if you're pulling bank statements, sometimes banks, if they're using a credit card processor, are gonna be net of fees. So you kind of have to be careful and understand the data that you're looking at.
And so when you're when you're measuring compliance, is it based on net sales or gross sales that the tax?
Quizzing.
Yeah.
I would say gross. Am I right?
Good guess.
And that's what I used, so I was right.
Sales.
But you know, like I think that a lot of times the point of sale systems, the number they spit out is with the 3% in there.
Yes, it depends.
And so like I think that's what I was trying to tease out, was just that there's some confusion. There's like a consistent confusion, I think, across all of our entities where what people are paying collecting and remitting the tax on is that higher number, but it includes the resort tax itself. And so then I'm finding that the auditors are saying, well, you're paying tax on tax and you don't need to do that.
And you do have people who do that, particularly when you get into the farmers markets. I'm gonna charge you $5 for a loaf of bread, and I'm just gonna figure out how much I owe on that, rather than you owe me $5.15. So.
Yeah. How about you, Katie? What does compliance look like, and what are the most common types of non-compliance that you've encountered?
Yeah, so a lot, of late reporting, a lot of that, and then, with these audits, obviously you find people that just haven't paid you enough that you are owed. And I think for us, like I said, it's really important that we have that ability to withhold their business license and have some kind of skin in there that they can just be like, okay, I do have to comply. It kind of gets into the gray areas we talked about earlier too, because these grocery stores, some of their items are taxable, some of them are not. So making sure that their point of sale systems are set up correctly. And convenience stores are the same exact way. And so some of them, I believe, I watched them do it, is they know exactly the sales tax that they collected for that month. And so then they go back and generate their gross taxable sales that way, because they're so complicated. And you gotta watch that stuff. And it tells you a lot when someone's at your counter and how they fill out those forms. And it's just a continuously monitoring and educating them on the proper way to do things.
Which leads to the next question, which is about education and striking that balance between education and enforcement. How do you make it so it leans towards education, or at least that's what it feels like to your vendors?
Yeah, I come from a family of school teachers, so thank goodness I did not end up as a school teacher. I would lose my mind. But education is like ingrained in me, and like helping share what you know with others and making sure it's facts. But it's when I first started, I had to learn a lot too. But now it's this has been our motto for this year, is just going out and watching those little details of like talk to them. Just talk to them about how they're doing it on the day to day, right? We get hammered on the 20th of the month because people want their 2.5% discount of their 4%. And so how are sales going? You know, what are some new things that you have in your store? Just talking to them. And then when it comes to the audit side, my auditors are great about telling them why they were not in compliance and what they found, whether it be that they owe us money or they owe us, either way. So we don't forgive anything, like when it comes to our audits. It's not like, oh, well, that was an honest mistake. You don't have to pay this $500 back to the town. But we are constantly trying to just communicate with your business owners all the time. I do not do newsletters. I do not do flash emails or anything like that, but just those one-on-one conversations. And you know, those people that drop off in the Dropbox, they miss that piece of us. And that's on them.
Right, and then, just in terms of the conversation between auditor and entity, I have found that every year, there's always like some question about the interpretation of this item or that item. Is this taxable? Is that not taxable? And then, so I'm gonna let you start with this, like, what does that conversation look like between you and your entity when it comes to bumping into that questionable item of taxability?
Like between me and the responsible party, or between me and like the district?
You and the district.
So if that situation came up, I would work closely with Kristen. And then, I mean, if we needed to, they have really good legal support, so we could reach out for an opinion from them. I haven't really run into that situation yet, but I mean, that would be my approach.
And then, so for, then now the question to follow up between you and the person who's getting audited, or the business that's getting audited. Do you find that, they take your information as, truth? You know what I mean? Like, are you finding any resistance on that? Or do you feel like you've garnered the kind of relationship or authority with them that they feel like they're getting good information?
Yeah, you know, I think so. I mean, I haven't had a situation yet where, I mean, maybe one where they weren't open to what I was saying. But I just kind of play dumb. Like, hey, I'm just the auditor. This is my interpretation. I'll definitely verify with the district, and then I'll report my findings after that. So being the independent party helps.
Right.
Because I'm not the standard setter, so.
Okay, and then, how about you, Katie, in terms of dealing with your auditor and the ones where there's like a question about, before it gets to the report part, what does that look like between you and your auditor as like West Yellowstone and the auditor?
Yeah.
Questionable items.
So we definitely have like multiple conversations and try to make sure that their interpretation of our ordinances and our standards, they're reading those correctly, like we're on the same page. Recent situation, short-term rentals, cleaning fees. Well, when you hire out or when you do it yourself, cleaning, and what does that look like? And, making sure that we have to be on the same page before we even talk to our business owners too, because they don't want to get out wrong information. So I know people say this all the time, but that constant line of communication is so important when it comes to anything that your entity does, but especially when it comes to resort tax, because that is our main stream of revenue. It keeps us going.
I think we're at the time, so, I think we've gotten some questions in along the way, so we need to wrap it up. We can, if anyone has a burning question that we didn't get answered with the group
I just
contribution.
have two little things that have been helpful for us from a compliance perspective. We do report to the Department of Revenue for a violation if it's a certain point for liquor license revocation.
Oh, wow.
That will get someone's attention.
Oh, yeah.
And it does get someone's attention.
Or dispensaries.
Dispensaries too. So that's a tool in your toolkit if you ever wanted to pursue that. And the other thing that has been helpful is, at least our legal counsel gave us the green light on it, but we, after a certain amount of lack of compliance or repeat, offenders, they go in the paper.
Oh, wow.
We print their name in the paper.
Pictures.
Mugshot, no.
So, and just to follow up on that, when it's lack of compliance, like what types of non-compliance are you talking about?
This would be someone that hasn't communicated or remitted in at least 6 months.
We filed lawsuits against them twice in 5 years, from attorneys and had to send a letter 3 times and something like that. I can't remember exactly, but it's pretty severe.
But a small town like that business might suffer on their own.
Did I hear correctly? It sounded to me when we were talking about like what is the blending? It sounded to me like delinquency and late filing is, I know that's our biggest one. Is that sounds like that's really. a big one.
Yeah, I know it is for Whitefish.
You mean versus not paying at all?
Well,
Well, that's the first.
late and not paying at all is just a matter of not being here. Not paying at all. But I can just see, I'm not gonna go there, I can see that list in the paper. The following businesses have not yet remitted their quarterly,
Or it's the second offense within X amount of days and, in there.
Wow.
Lanie, thanks so much.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you both. Thanks, sir.
Quick side note, I brought a copy